bless you. Thank you, Eleanor, for a splendid introduction. This is actually my fourth book, but it is the one that I wanted to write first. It's the one that's closest to my heart. With this extraordinary format, I think one thing that I can offer you is a bit of a cold shower after all of that food. So I hope I'm going to cool you all down a bit, and then the rest of them can warm you up. I have been to Antarctica. In fact, I've been there 5 times and counting. And I only meant to go there once. It was a bit of an accident. And the reason that I wrote this book and the reason I kept going back is that there was something about the continent that really gripped me. And I wanted to understand what it was. And I've discovered in my previous books that very often the only way to find out what you think is to write it down. And you only really understand what a book's about when you finished it. And that was certainly true here. So, an intimate portrait of the world's most mysterious continent. Here we go, and I need to turn this on. There we go. So, quick geography lesson. The first reason I wanted to go to Antarctica, having romped around the world, going to other places that I found quite extraordinary, was that it was the highest, driest, windiest, coldest, weirdest, farthest, most hostile, most inhuman place on Earth. And in fact, what's extraordinary about it is that this is more or less the size of Europe, or continental USA, but humans have never lived there, and they still don't live there. It's the only place on Earth that has no human history. We only actually discovered it, we only met it for the first time about 250 years ago, and before then there were fabulously wild and wacky ideas about what might be there, including a hole that aliens lived in or a massive tropical forest. But it's only about 250 years ago that the first people went across and saw what was there, and what they saw was a vast land covered in ice. Now, I went to different bits of it, different parts and different geographies, and found some great fun stories, met fascinating people, met extraordinary animals. I'm only going to tell you about 3 of those different parts now. One is a couple of little stories about the coast, one is about the interior, and then one is about the melting ice. So first of all, the coast. It's very pretty. It's also the place where most of the life is. So you hear a lot about life in Antarctica. You hear about your penguins and your seals and your whales. One of the things that really struck me about the animals that I met there, they all get their life, they all get their living from the sea. And that's where all the energy is. And so you only find animals around Antarctica, around the coast. And, of course, when I first went down there, I was determined not to fall in love with penguins. And I tell you, it took about 5 minutes before I lost it. Before I'd gone, I was going to Antarctica, so my friends, they bought me penguin pajamas, they bought me penguin mugs, they bought me penguin pens, they bought me penguin everything. Even when I said no more penguins, they said it's just a little one. So I was really determined not to fall for them. But I didn't fall for them because they're beautiful, and I didn't actually fall for them because they're cute, although they are both of those things. I fell for them because they have enormous, extraordinary capacity to deal with these hostile environments in a way that I just think is very cool. They have amazing personalities. And these are the famous emperor penguins, the ones that go right the way through the winter. The males take the eggs on their feet, the females go off to feed, and the males fast. So you see a cold shower, no food, no sex, nothing, in the cold. They fast for 2.5 months. And the temperatures go down to -20, -30. There's the strongest winds in the world, winds of 100, 150 miles an hour. And they just stand there with the eggs, fasting for 2.5 months. Now, that's pretty resilient and pretty extraordinary. But the other thing is the way that they do it, how they survive. They are completely unterritorial. They huddle. They actually huddle together for warmth. And in the middle of the huddling group, it can get so hot. It's actually a relief to go to the side and cool down a bit before you carry on. So that's how these guys do it. This little fella. So the whole of Antarctica is not owned by anyone. There's an official Antarctic treaty that says if you're going to go there, you have to sign the treaty, and if you're going to have any significant presence, you can only do peace and science. You can't use it for commercial exploitation. You can't use it to look for minerals. You can't use it for military purposes. If you're assigned to studying penguins, you're allowed to go up to them and do things to them as long as you have a permit. If you're not a scientist, you're not allowed to approach them for more than 5 meters away. But there's nothing to stop them approaching you. And this guy really struck me. One of the things that's amazing about penguins is that they have no fear. They have no fear on land because there are no humans and no land animals and nothing. They're sea creatures, basically. So they have no fear. So they just walk up to him, blimey, that's a big penguin. No idea at all. And this little Adelie penguin, followed me home one night, and after that I was completely gone for it. But the real reason I fell for it was the same penguin. I saw it. I was on a base where there were all these little Adelie penguins around. Now they are knee high. You saw how high the other one was. They are knee high. And they're walking along the same paths as the researchers who are on this base, because it's quite a convenient way to get down to the sea. This little guy was walking along behind. The two researchers were not getting out of the way fast enough. Goes up to them and goes, whack! And you have no idea. They swim. They've got really strong muscles, and so they can really leave quite a bruise. They have no fear, and they're really tough, and they're great. But the other thing that I found out about them was that the researchers who are working on them have discovered that they know their bodies incredibly well. And they know the point at which the game's not worth the candle, the exact point. And this is another food and sex reference, actually, I now realise. Because they do their thing, they get together, they have their mate, they have their sex, the females go off to feed. These guys don't fast for as long, but they sit there with the egg waiting to be relieved. And they wait, and they wait. But if something's happened to Mrs. Penguin, she's not going to come back. And there's a precise moment where they know if they don't go now, they'll die. And they release hormones, the little feet start moving, and they get up off the egg and they go, because they can always come back and have another egg next year. And one of the things that I found amazing about that is that I recognised it very vividly in some of the stories that I've been hearing about the early heroic explorers. So in my book, I've tried to weave together some of these stories. And this one, he is my hero, my favourite. This is the splendid Ernest Shackleton, the boss, extraordinary leader, incredibly charismatic man. Had a bit of a fight with Captain Scott. So Scott and Shackleton both went down at the same time, and they both tried to get to the South Pole. And they hardly got any distance. It was a bit of a mess, and they all got scurvy, and they didn't know what it was. And Scott blamed Shackleton. Shackleton is very charismatic. Everybody liked him. He was an instinctive leader. If he said something, people followed. Scott was a bit more awkward with people. He didn't really like having his authority challenged, so he sent Shackleton home. So Shackleton put together an expedition. He was going to go back, and he was going to get to the South Pole before anyone else could now do it. So in 1909, he was down there on a trip to the South Pole. And he went farther and farther than anyone had been. He discovered that the continent actually had a flat part, and then went up through these mountains to this incredible high plateau where the ice was so thick, it was like being on an ice mountain, and you were kind of dizzy with altitude sickness from it and dragging along, and it was colder than he'd expected. He didn't have enough food, and he started to calculate. And he got within 100 miles of the pole. And he did, I think, one of the bravest things that any heroic explorer has ever done. He got his men together and said, we can get to the pole, we can be heroes, but we won't make it home. So they turned around and they went back. And he never did make it to the pole, in fact, and he didn't win that race. But by that action, I think he won the extraordinary admiration and respect of an awful lot of people. He said to his wife, better a live donkey than a dead lion. But he was no donkey. So, a couple of other quick creatures. What I'm showing you here is some of the fabulous animals around the edges, remember. Also with just the weird ways that they behave. These birds are beautiful. They're called snowpetrels. And they look like souls, beautiful souls flying through the sky. And then when you see them up close, they fight and they spit. They spit with huge gobs of orange goo. And that's the way that they actually manage to keep their territory, because their territory becomes so important to them. And then you have this bizarre creature. This is an ice fish. This is an ice fish that swims around in seawater at -2 degrees C. It's -2 because there's so much salt in it that it's below freezing. And how don't they freeze? They have antifreeze. They have antifreeze in their blood, just like the stuff that you put in your car. They have that in their blood. So first part of the Antarctic story really is that it's alien, it's weird, it's very, very different. However, if you go into the interior, I've just said that it's like a mountain of ice. And that is what it looks like. And that is what captivated me. Because it's like walking on the moon. There is nothing. There is no food. There is no fuel. There is no shelter. There is no liquid water. There are no animals. There is nothing to eat. There is nothing to hide from. There is just cold and ice. And it is spectacular. It is spectacular for thousands of miles in every direction. These two guys, Scott and Amundson, these are the ones who made the race to the pole. This is the 100th-year anniversary of when Amundson made it successfully and Scott sadly died on the way back. Lots of people have plenty of theories about all of this. I'm not going to talk about any of it except to say that one of the biggest differences between them was that Scott really was a scientist, or at least he was fascinated by science. He wanted to do science. And by his body, when he was discovered, there was an interesting scientific find which is only really starting to come into its own today. And I'll come back to that in a moment. However, you can't really see that there's a telescope there. The lights aren't brilliant on this. But this is the South Pole in the winter. And what I was trying to show you here is some extraordinary science that's happening there now, still on the kind of alien theme, reaching out into the universe, looking at the very origins of the universe, the black hole that lies at the centre of the galaxy, all sorts of weird and hostile and strange and different things. But I'm showing you all of this because at the South Pole I also met one of the most extraordinary men I've ever seen. He's called Jake Speed. He spent 5 successive winters at the South Pole, 9 months where you're stuck there, 6 months of darkness, minus 70 degrees C. And he did not call it hostile, and he did not say he was conquering it. He called it intimate, and he called it patient. And what I discovered since is that Antarctica actually does have things to tell us. It's not hostile, it's not angry, it's not as alien and weird as I thought. It actually has things to tell us that are quite intimate about our prospects for the future. And they come in these tiny bubbles of ice that are buried very, very deep. The ice is 2 miles thick. If you go further down and further down, you get to older and older ice. And that ice has bubbles in it that have never been smelled, never been sniffed by humans. They're 1 million years old. And you can trace the history of our climate in this record book that's in Antarctica. And it tells us that our climate is changing because of things that we're doing. So there's a warning note, first of all. The second one is, all around the continent now, the ice is starting to melt. You can see this beautiful picture of the kind of squared-off icebergs that you get in Antarctica, and they really are spectacularly big. One researcher who was taking me to go and visit one of his sites, we actually flew onto an iceberg, and we landed on it, and he said, this iceberg is not just bigger than the iceberg that sank the Titanic. It's not just bigger than the Titanic. It's bigger than the city that built the Titanic. That's how big these icebergs are. And it's big and it's impressive, but it's also a bit scary because all around the continent now, ice shells are making icebergs like this. They are shattering. They are breaking up one after another. And one part of Antarctica, the peninsula, is warming 3 times faster than anywhere else on Earth. It's a real warming hotspot. So that sounds a bit alarming because it's kind of a warning sign from Antarctica. I was saying that it's kind of this alien hostile place. Maybe it's got these warnings for us. But does that also mean it's quite vulnerable? Because my first impression of it was as a really kind of strong, all-conquering place. And now you start to think the ice is melting. Maybe it is vulnerable. Maybe we ought to protect it. Maybe it's fragile. And I don't really think so. Because this is what Antarctica used to look like. 100 million years ago, Antarctica was covered in forest and ferns and swamps and dinosaurs. Captain Scott, when he was discovered, had collected some geological samples that he'd lugged with him. He knew he was probably going to die, but he still couldn't resist taking them with him because they had fronds of leaves embedded in them. He found fossils showing that there had been forests in Antarctica. And then since, we've found dinosaur bones. Just in the last few decades, dinosaur bones all over the few parts that have rocks exposed, you can find dinosaur bones sticking out. And what I take from this is that Antarctica was sitting on the South Pole at the time these dinosaurs were around. The entire Earth was so hot that there was no ice on either pole. In fact, there wasn't just no ice on either pole, it was boiling hot there. It was steamy and swampy. You can see the southern lights that are there and the dinosaurs. Some of them seem to evolve strange sort of big eye sockets to cope with the 6 months of darkness that you get there. So, what do I take from that? Thinking about what captivated me about this place, I don't think Antarctica really cares. I don't think it cares if it's covered in ice or if it's covered in forests or if it's covered in tropical swamps. And in a way, that melting ice is actually what happens to us. It goes into the sea and it raises sea level. And all these coastal cities that we have built for ourselves, the sort of 7 billion and counting humans around the world, are the ones who are going to get hit by that. And that really gives me pause because I started off thinking it was hostile and alien and then maybe fragile. And in fact, it's more like the classic hero story. The hero goes to the ends of the earth and finds a mirror, or the girl next door. This is me leaning against the cross that was there for Scott and his men. And written on it is the famous line from Ulysses, to search, to seek, to strive, and not to yield. But it's still talking about a continent that's about conquering. And really, it's magic, it's powerful, it's beautiful, it's fun, there's fascinating people who now go there. But it's also got a message for us if we want to hear it. Thank you very much.